Hi there, rompereglas. Welcome to this episode on intimacy wounds. Whew, this is so up for me right now because I've had several incidents this week of confronting other people's and my own intimacy wounds. And in keeping with the theme of intimacy, I want to let you know that I have 15 spots open in my brand new mastermind, what I'm calling the Sovereign 9-month Meta Body Intimacy and Integrity Accelerator. So this meta body is a hybrid between somatic group process and one-on-one intensive, and it's designed to heal the intimacy wounds that create barriers to intimacy and partnerships. It's there to support you to solidify and seal stray boundary leakages, increase energetic holding capacity for activations like relationship activations and repair work, to help you resolve patterns of self-betrayal, fawn responding, energetic collapse, deepen safety and self-trust through emotional attunement to your inner experiences, and align your spiritual values with your relationship behaviors. You already know that the depth and quality of intimacy is about nervous system capacity building, and the somatic process is intended to support you in opening up more space for you to receive and hold. And of course, this is about so much more than improving romantic partnerships. This is about owning the full size of your desires and your truth. It's about creating conscious partnerships in all areas of your life, and in the collective, building cultures of connection, integrity, and accountability. It's where the internal alchemy meets the collective ripple. As above, so below, as they say. So the link to the Sovereign Meta Body is in the show notes. And if you're interested, just get on a 30-minute free curiosity call with me to see if it's an aligned fit for where you are right now and for what you're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to have a sip of my tea and we're going to get into it. Okay, so intimacy wounds. Intimacy wounds. What the fuck are they and why are they important? How do we heal them? Let's get into it. Okay. So most of us have experienced some form of early attachment wounding in relationship with our caregivers, meaning that your very first relationship sometimes felt unsafe, or it was inconsistent, or it was emotionally disconnected. And it's not because you weren't loved, it's that you were not attuned to in ways that helped you regulate your developing socio-emotional nervous system, right? Your executive functioning, your prefrontal cortex. And attunement is the felt experience of love. You know, when parents back in the day, right, they were busy and there were stressors. And nowadays, parents are incredibly distracted and stressed out in very, very different ways. You know, and just having lots of work to do, or just having, distractions like the phone, and having to deal with COVID, those are the mildest versions of misattunement. The more extreme cases, of course, would be parents who are emotionally fragile, or substance abuse, or parental absence, overt experiences of neglect and abuse, or the trauma of oppression, just having to deal with racism, and even having to deal with the compounded collective trauma of slavery, let's say, okay? So nobody really escapes the process of being hurt in our first relationships, because parenting is hard, it's messy, it's imperfect, and because we don't have the adequate systems in place to support parents, like the systemic supports. We don't have the villages and the communities that we used to that would reduce stress and provide more opportunities for attuned relating. And these misattunements are overwhelming to a child's system, to a developing child system, especially when you don't yet possess language, you can't express yourself with words, or you don't have the capacity to filter what's incoming. And you look to your parent or parents as the template for how to relate, right? It's just this mirroring effect. The child just indiscriminately absorbs the parent's level of stress and anxiety. And so this mirroring dynamic and absorption process causes changes in the brain and the nervous system. Think, dopamine receptors and executive function, if you want to get like science-y on it. But also the energy body, right? It creates changes in how we manage the energy moving through our bodies as part of managing fear and overwhelm. So when your parents are unable to meet you in the full expression of your life force, you learn how not to be in order to get love, acceptance, belonging, because for a child, survival is much more important than authenticity, right? So through a process of pruning, you begin to bring forward who you need to be in order to be loved and accepted, and you cut off or exile the parts that maybe tend to be ignored or that tend to be unappreciated, shamed, or punished, not only by caregivers, but by collective norms and expectations. For example, in schools, teachers don't want super exuberant kids. And so they want children to sit at their desks, or they want them to play nicely, or to not use their voices so loud. And that begins to tamp down on this really big, juicy expression. And so you, children, create energetic strategies, for example, holding your energy together, right? So pulling it in or holding it back, right? Putting what's out in front towards the back of the body. Or you hold it up, for example, you pull it up from the legs and the pelvis up into the chest and the head. So you become sort of this more intellectual person. And this all helps you cope with the pain and the fear of disconnection and loss. So when these energetic strategies work, the system repeats them. And over time, they become habitual and patterned. And the only reason they feel normal is because they're habitual. But these manipulations of energy are actually a traumatized way of being in the body and being in relationships, because the ego and the nervous system, they work in tandem to create barriers and blocks to intimacy as a way to protect itself. And this traumatized way of being is like this awkward suit that we wear, like it's too big or it's too constricting, or it's like it doesn't fit right. And we walk around thinking, oh, this is the way I am, right? So just going back to the nervous system and the ego piece, your body system, when it's all protected and there's all these barriers and blocks, your system will read intimacy and connection as a threat. And that's why the capacity to receive intimacy and connection is limited. You can think of this as scar tissue developing around a wound. And why it's important is that we bring the scar tissue into all of our relationships, especially our romantic ones, because at the soul level, we're seeking to heal these intimacy wounds, right? And our suffering, a lot of our suffering relationship is set up by our natural and healthy desire to heal ourselves, which is great, because we do heal in relationships. And it's also brought on by reaching outside of ourselves to get our belonging needs met, etc. So, like I said, ideally, we do heal in relationships, but often we're unable to truly create relationships that facilitate healing because we're not aware of how these intimacy wounds are playing a part in the dynamic. So even though it's not conscious, we have parts of us that want to outsource being loved, belonging, being taken care of, being accepted, being wanted or desired. You get where I'm going with this. And when we're not aware of the templates, these energetic strategies or relational strategies, we end up recreating and reenacting the wounds because they act like scripts written into the body, right? Written into the muscles, complete with mental narratives about ourselves and other people, like, not trusting people, not trusting life, not trusting the universe, not trusting ourselves, like All of that stuff is sort of part of the energetic holding and the scripts that are written in our bodies. So although the original intention of the strategy was to protect, but because it's so baked into the system, it's going to show up everywhere, right? Because that's what you carry with you, and you sort of replicate and repeat that in anything you put your energy into, from your relationship with God, universe, spirit, to your relationship with money, to your work partnerships. So an example of this would be, let's say you have a fear of rejection. And so you don't allow people to get really close because it gets really scary that you might be left. And again, you probably have this because at some point you experienced some form of rejection, whether it was, an example of having been treated very harshly, like through overt abuse, or something more subtle where you felt rejected, where your perception was of feeling rejected, but your caregiver or whoever you were interacting with didn't actually intend to do it that way. So in your adult relationships, perhaps you actually choose unavailable partners, whether they're not really invested in committing or they're kind of emotionally indifferent. So we unconsciously reenact the rejection, right? Because they're kind of not there emotionally, or they don't show up for you. It creates the same pain. And those, when that pain is recreated, it's an opportunity for you to go into the pain and to like resolve the pain, to feel it. But what we often do is that we stay in the story of the pain. We're like, I'm so rejectable, right? Is the story we're holding in our bodies. It's the narrative or the script that we're holding in our body. And we sort of kind of recycle that instead of going through the true raw pain of having been rejected, that original pain. So this same example on a business level might show up, how this might be reenacted in an entrepreneurial sense, right? You might reenact the rejection with potential clients on a sales call. You might not put your offer out there or talk about it, really get behind it, because you feel like if they say no, it's going to hurt you, right? Or you might not reach out to a potential mentor because you think they won't want to have you around, So these show up in obvious and subtle ways. I'm really interested more in the subtle ones because I know that if you're listening to this, you've already done a ton of work on yourself. It's really about subtle energy and about subtle manipulations of power and control, which is really about the shadow work. And even something as simple as using relationship cutoff or cancellation, as in cancel culture, in relationships is often how these intimacy wounds get replicated. That's also another example. And especially with shadow work, our protective defenses often work against what we most desire in our hearts and on the soul level, which is to be seen, felt, heard, and deeply connected to. And creating spiritual partnerships, in particular relationships that hold the potential to heal these intimacy wounds, is about being responsible and taking ownership for the energy you bring into the dynamic. We can't own and be fully responsible for the energy we bring into relationships if we don't know what we're doing, if we're not aware of our patterns, and not just aware like of the obvious things. Again, this goes more into the subtle energetics of it, because this stuff is pre-verbal. It is sneaky and subtle. Trust me, because I'm tracking it all the time and I'm just like, whoops, that showed up again, And in case this is sounding a little bit harsh and serious, it's because I've paid a really, really high price for this. And in my life right now, there is fuckery because of this. And I also believe wholeheartedly that healing intimacy wounds changes not only the energetics of our closest relationships, but because it's related to our relationships with everything, it actually changes the energetics of how we interbe, how we interact, and how we show up for one another in the bigger collective picture. This week, dealing with, you know, Putin invading the Ukraine, and with anti-trans legislation in Texas and Florida, racist bullshit everywhere. We have people with intimacy wounds who are, we have people with intimacy wounds in leadership who use power as a way to control their internal dysregulation, right? So when we see this type of abuses of power, it all goes back to these intimacy wounds. And I know that you already know that. I just feel like I need to say it to the people in the back. These are the sort of the obvious abuses, but again, like bringing it into the subtle body. I had interactions this week where I could feel the part of me that where I feel rejected, where I feel kind of left out. It was sort of coming up, and I was just observing that. And there was that I could feel the protective part wanting to come right over and say something mean about the person that I felt rejected by. And I sort of slowed that down and pulled it back. It's like, yeah, we don't need to do that. Just feel that place. What does that feel like? Stay curious, right? And that curiosity and that willingness to go inward is part of the healing process. And it requires so much compassion. A lot of times we get kind of impatient with these parts. We get kind of like tired and exhausted by like, oh, you're here again. But really, what these parts need is that loving attunement that they didn't get, that we also seek to get in our relationships with other people. So healing my own intimacy wounds is specifically having to witness these parts of myself with compassion and with that attunement has supported me in being able to hold compassion for other people who are also in their wound, even when they're, externalizing and projecting their pain. I can hold space for the part that is hurting, although, you got to put boundaries around that as well. You got to protect your energy. Yeah, so I'm just going to take a drink for a moment. Yeah, so once I became aware of what I was doing with my energy, and I was able to bring these unconscious patterns into awareness through the healing process, it absolutely changed the way I understood myself as a human being, how I understood other people, and how I interacted with them. I just developed a completely different language for being able to name what was happening in the moment. Before, I didn't used to name all of these subtle experiences going on inside. But when you start to notice like the subtle energetics and the subtle sensations in the body, then you're able to catch these things much, much better. Before my somatic training, I had no idea that I was protecting myself in all of these ways. And I thought the strategies were part of my personality, like just the way that I was. For example, I used to withhold my vulnerability. I used to withhold information. I used to withhold my process. I used to withhold my love. I used to withhold truth, my authenticity. Basically, I used to hide. I was really good at hiding and not letting myself be seen, even though deep, deep down, my deepest desire was to be seen and witnessed. And I know that if you're listening, you're probably aware of how some of these dynamics are, moving in your own relationships. But what you may not have experienced is the incredibly transformative power of alchemizing them through the body, through energy awareness and expressive movement. And additionally, what's truly beautiful about healing intimacy wounds, and this is my favorite part, in case this was getting a little bit too trauma, gloom, and doom for you, is that the places you were hurt are the same places in which your greatest gifts can be alchemized. So I'm going to say that again. The places you got hurt are the same places where your greatest gifts can be alchemized. So I'll share an example. So I shared just a moment ago my strategy of holding back my heart. Well, during my training, what I stupidly came to realize was that my heart was so huge and squishy and gushy, I could barely stand it. I couldn't tolerate it. Like there were times where I actually had reactions of disgust at my own softness. And so I realized over the course of those 4 years that love, giving and receiving it, was actually my superpower. And for those who have worked with me, you've felt it. I know you felt it. I'm right there with you. My heart can really hold a lot. And the only reason I brag this is because, like I said, it wasn't always the case. I wasn't always connected to my own love because that's precisely what had not been seen or appreciated in my family of origin. And I was loved, for sure I was, but I was also raised to be tough, not soft. Softness would have led to my emotional annihilation. Which leads me to an important piece. Truly appreciating the way your body kept you safe when it wasn't safe to be your shiny and loving, fully expressed self. The strategies you developed were ingenious in that they helped you survive, and they deserve that recognition. They deserve to be applauded, right? You just don't need them now. In fact, now that the context for them being there no longer exists, they're kind of in the way, right? They're kind of like funhouse mirrors. Like you don't need to be distorting your partner through this funhouse mirror, or you don't need to be distorting how you see yourself through these distortions. So I'm going to talk about one of the strategies that is one of my favorite because the capacity for limitless love is the superpower. So the merging pattern or the merging strategy is based in abandonment, lack of nurturance and support. So the energetic strategy is to hold on, right? To grip and grasp. And that can mean holding on to other people, right? Clinging, sometimes it's called, or holding on to external supports such as food, alcohol, approval, all of those things. It's a little bit, you can feel the fawn response in there with the approval. So externally, it's most visible through a sense of fatigue and non-assertiveness, right? There's an energetic collapse in the body. And I can not only see, like I can read bodies, but I can feel energetic bodies. So I can like see the energy and how it's moving in your body. So it's hard for me to describe sort of what I see, but there's this like, it's almost like the energy is like leaking out of the root, but more specifically from just below the belly button. It's kind of like pouring out and forward, and there's also like this pouring out from the heart. And I'll go into that in a second. So the basic belief of this strategy, the belief that's baked into the system, is that they'll never get enough love. You'll never get enough love. There'll never be enough. And in the body, it's really about like not having really gotten enough nurturance. And so there's this energetic sense of emptiness that needs to be filled, like a void that wants to be, filled up. And sometimes that happens through overeating. Sometimes it happens through shopping, alcohol, sex, polyamorous relationships. Some people enter polyamory because they want all the attention, or they want all of these relationships, but there isn't really a lot of depth to any of them. Sometimes it's video games, sometimes it's hoarding money, right? Not enough money. There's that internalization of not having gotten enough support and nurturance that is personalized also to not being enough, which translates a lot of times into doing more. So in that, there's the belief of, if I love enough, then maybe I'll get love back, right? And so here we see the pattern of, empaths getting into relationships with narcissists who are takers, right? And the empath is like, oh, maybe if I'll give enough, my partner will change. They will be transformed by my love and they will love me back. Poor thing, they're so hurt and wounded. So I'll leave that there for a moment. And in this strategy, there's two subtypes. There's the one that is overgiving, and then there's the one that is overgiving and that won't need. And then there's the one that is overgiving and that also pulls energy. But it's kind of like, I will overgive and I will show you that I'm overgiving, but sort of on the back end, I'm also like wanting something in return, and they'll sort of pull that way. So one is compensated and is disconnected from their own need. They see need out in the world, like, oh, this person needs something and that person needs something, but they're not connected to their own need. So deprivation, any sort of deprivation and threat of abandonment is what activates the strategy. And they tend to perceive deprivation because that's already their history they're holding in their body. So that's the stuff that you will notice first in your relationships, that the deprivation and the activation around the deprivation. So what happens in this strategy is that there's this sense of emptiness, this inner emptiness, and sometimes that shows up as depression or dependency. There's a tendency to collapse and feel lost. There's a fear of being left behind, maybe some FOMO. So the underlying paradox that wants to be resolved is to honor and express the fact that you have need because you're human, while also acknowledging the power to meet your own needs by advocating for them. And in this strategy, there's this part of the dynamic is serving at the expense of self. So there's an abandonment of one's own needs and trying to meet the other people so that they can be loved. So there's this energetic pattern of like coming up and out and going out into the world. And so the part of the healing is to bring the energy in and back down. Yeah. So the beautiful strengths that I had mentioned earlier of this particular strategy is wisdom, logic, and a deep sense of empathy. And this, when that is allowed to deepen, when that deprivation is allowed to be filled energetically, this can open into a deep reverential love, like from this place of needing to be filled up or not having had enough. You can actually create a feeling of abundance that then gets poured out into the world. So these are the true lovers of the world, the deep feelers, the people that truly, truly care, a lot of which are rompereglas. And sometimes, we also need to sort of temper these places enough that care so much. I see this pattern a lot of like caring so much, but we're in the caring, we're also pouring that love out. We do need to nourish ourselves in the process. And that's how we create energetic boundaries so that we don't get overwhelmed by the hurt in the world. So yes, to the deep feelers, and we get to feel ourselves as well. So how do we heal these intimacy wounds? Let's get into that. Okay, take a drink here. All right. So because these strategies are lodged in the nervous system and in the subtle energy body, in somatic intimacy alchemy, we become aware of them through breath work, subtle energy awareness, sensation, and expressive movement. And we also use attunement, right? Once you become aware, you have the choice of moving towards emotions with curiosity that were once too overwhelming to feel. And this is the emotional regulation piece. And there's a specific 4-step process that I teach for it. You interrupt the strategy when you notice it coming up, and you act in alignment with your deeper values and desires. That's partly mindset, right? Being able to notice when the pattern is arising and exercising choice. And part of it is opening up or reclaiming the parts of the erotic life force that were previously locked away. And when you open up the life force, you open up for more pleasure, creativity, play, expression. That's all part of pleasure. And of course, we have the opportunity to become aware of how these strategies show up in our everyday life through our relationships. But because the ego is so good at protecting itself, it often creates a story about us being justified in our protection so that it blocks our awareness, or it stops the awareness, which obviously just keeps the strategy in place. So healing really involves a lot of ego death. I think that's the hardest part. And the rewards are so fucking huge. What I want you to know today, as you listen to this, is that your true capacity for intimacy is much deeper than you believe it to be, and that it's in there. It was baked into you before that other shit got baked into you. It's dormant inside, and you can wake it up. It's your baseline. It's something that you can remember through the healing process, right? That complete, fulfilled love already exists inside of you. And you can learn attunement and learn to direct it inward towards the parts of you that were not met, the parts of you that need, the parts that want belonging, the parts that fear rejection. You can direct that inward and become a really good listener to the aspects that are coming up, to sensations, to the subtle energies, and really hold them and care for them in a way that they weren't before. So healing intimacy wounds is when to think about the body, is really about opening the heart, opening up the pelvis, connecting heart to sex, which is so much of what this podcast is about, bringing it into alignment, and obviously the nervous system regulation piece, right? Bringing that all to its original capacity. And this is all about reclaiming the life force, remembering your inherent wholeness and emotional and energetic sovereignty. So that's it for today. I feel like this is particularly satisfying to talk about today, given what's happening in the world and what's happening in my life personally, that this really is a message that I'm not going to stop talking about, because it really is at the core of building relationships that heal, building businesses and that feel good, that are drenched in pleasure, that, like, it really is so much bigger than sort of the personal, what's happening in your personal life, but it really about the ripple into the collective. All right. Thanks for listening. Love y'all.